Hello and welcome to the second ever DSJAS devlog video, which if you watch the first one you'll know is an unedited series where I go through all of the things that have been considered, talked about, and done in the times between episodes in the development community behind DSJAS, which as of the time of recording this is actually 3 people larger than it was when we recorded the first episode. And that's great for me because I'm really grateful for anyone who's willing to help me out with this kind of thing. So we've had people contributing style sheets, people contributing design ideas, people contributing mechanical ideas. So we've had something submitted, an idea called dynamic style sheets, which would allow themes to provide a style sheet which can be dynamically configured as to what the style is through the admin dashboard. So that would help it so that even if 3 different people have the same theme installed, one of them could have a pink background or something like that, and all of this could be configured through the admin dashboard. So we're working on all of this kind of stuff, and while all of that's going on, we've got plans for how to implement the statistics side of the admin dashboard, which if you tuned in last time you'll know is something that's on the to-do list. And we're also working towards setting up the hooks system so that we can get extensions up and running. So I'm really thrilled about all of this. It's all going really well, and I'm really glad that we're getting so much work done in such a short amount of time. Now you might be wondering why there's such a large gap between this episode and the last episode. I've got to be honest, the real reason is because I recorded another episode of this a few weeks before I'm recording this one, and I just didn't really like it. There wasn't enough progress made, there wasn't enough to talk about. It only lasted about 12 minutes, and although 12 minutes is quite a long time in the grand scheme of things, I still don't really think that we should be keeping the devlogs that short. I mean, we're already at about 1/5 of that from just this amount of time. So yeah, I've put it off just a little bit so that we can have a little bit more to talk about, and hopefully this is going to be pretty good. So, this time it should be a little less informal because I've actually set up a plan this time. So we actually have a table of contents. If I just switch over, you'll be able to see I actually have a table of contents set up with all the stuff we need to talk about. And that's good because it means that I won't be rambling around trying to think about what I'm supposed to be saying next. It means we actually have an agenda to talk about. With that being said, I think the first thing we should start off with, following the theme of the first episode, is to talk a little bit about the developer workflow. So the first thing that you'll probably see is we now have Composer files, and if you don't know what Composer is, it's basically a dependency manager, kind of like Node Package Manager or Chocolatey or something like that, but for PHP. And we don't actually use any of this stuff. You don't actually use any of this stuff in the application itself. All of it is just for code sniffing, which is essentially scanning through the code and checking whether it's up to an acceptable standard. So you can see here that it's all under required dev rather than the usual of just require. You can actually see at the bottom that there's actually nothing inside of this require tag. It's all just an empty array, and that basically means that Composer doesn't think that we have anything which our application requires when it's going to be shipped to users, which is absolutely correct. We don't have anything that we need when it's going to be shipped to users. All that we need is stuff when it's being developed, and that's great for me. So, in order to get Composer, we've actually updated it. So in the scripts directory, there's now something called install Composer, and in the git ignore, you'll notice we now ignore everything in the vendor folder because that's where Composer puts its stuff. And there's also, it ignores composer.far, and composer.far is just a PHP script with binary data inside of it. If we go back up to the top, you can see that we have some binary data that VS Code can't read, and it halts the compiler. It basically means that it's got binary data, so the PHP interpreter should stop. and VS Code's really not happy about that and highlighted the entire file red. But if we look inside of the install composer script, you can see all it does is downloads the composer installer from the latest version that it gets from an API that's set up on that website, and it then runs the composer setup script with the quiet flag to make sure that it doesn't produce any command line output, and it then unlinks that file, basically permanently deletes it from the file system, then echoes out a message, and this is all done in the safest way possible. We check the SHA hashes before it actually installs on your system, and even if something does go wrong, it's only installing a local copy in the scripts directory, so it doesn't actually matter. You might be confused a little bit about this install folder. This isn't actually anything to do with installing Composer. This is to do with the install script. It's data that's used for the install script. Okay, so we have Composer. That's awesome. So what does that mean? It basically means that before you push a tag or anything, or push a pull request, or do anything like that to the GitHub repository, you can now run phpcs on the command line, and it will automatically scan all of the changes and determine whether they're following the code style that we set out in phpcs.xml. And basically what we've done is we've told it to ignore some of the more annoying ones like file length, file comments, and function and class comments, basically meaning that all it's going to check for is correctly indented and correct syntactically PHP. And you'll notice as well that we have everything set up so that we can tell CI scripts what to think. So everything is set up so that we could get CI ready, continuous integration. If you've never heard of that before, it's basically just where you can push it to something like Travis CI, and Travis CI will be able to determine whether the build succeeded. You might have noticed this on GitHub repositories before. They like to do it quite a lot. So we've added some branches as well. These branches are all to do with the different sub-projects that we have going on, and that's the next thing I want to talk about. I'm going to move on to all of this different stuff individually, but you can see we have a Docker, we have one for developing dashboard features, one for cleaning up the code, which is a code cleanup operation. We've got a documentation development branch, and then obviously just the master branch. Everything's being just based off the master branch at the moment, but I'm starting to base things more off the code cleanup branch, because the code is a lot different inside of that branch than it is in the master branch right now, because there are actually some breaking changes that we need to fully test on the code cleanup branch before we can actually move it into master and start shipping it out to users. So if we go through each of the branches individually, they're all pretty self-explanatory, but beta dashboard is actually a tag, not a branch, sorry. This is just a tag that I set up so that I could compare how the dashboard has changed throughout versions. It's read-only, obviously, because it's a tag. So let's go through individually. So master is obviously just the default branch, but then documentation is where we add documentation files. So this is where we're developing the documentation project I talked about a little while ago, and where we're going to be adding all of the markdown files required and everything like that. All of that's being done inside of that branch. Then there's the code cleanup branch. The code cleanup branch is what it sounds like. We're just cleaning up all the code, making it release ready, making it so that everything is all nice and, well, clean. I don't know what else to say, really. It's just a code cleanup operation. I'll talk a little bit more in a minute about some of the stuff that we've done inside of the code cleanup operation, but for now, I'm just going to keep it nice and simple, say we're cleaning the code. Right, Docker support. Pretty basic again, but this is probably the one that's diverged the most from master, because we've pretty much changed major mechanics within the site to fit with Docker. And that's it. Okay, so the next thing we need to talk about are code snippets. So in the VSCode directory, there's now snippets.codesnippet, and you'll see that there's snippets for doing lots of things quickly. So there's for setting up a basic theme file, there's stuff for setting up a basic module configuration, and there's stuff for adding jump to load scripts, which we'll talk about in a little while. So if I add a new PHP file and we set the type to PHP, and then if we go back to the snippets, you can see that there's one called load routine. So if we if we open a PHP file, I didn't mean to do that, and then if we type load in, you can see that our snippet shows up with the description load routine. And then if we press tab, then we get load routine, and we can tab through all of the different stuff to make it do what we need. So this will all work precisely as it should do when it is placed in an anchor point. And we're going to talk a little bit about this load routine in a little while, because this isn't actually implemented properly on the master branch yet, but it will be. And we can add extra load events, we can clean all of this up, we can do everything that we would do normally. So this can allow us to very quickly develop anchor points. It's all very convenient. Basic module. So a basic module is actually for JSON files. So if we set this to JSON and we type in model, we'll get this. So then we can input the module name, description, and everything. So if I just do example module and then an example module, we just set it to like 1.5.1, and then the module hooks we can just set to like example hook for it to be loaded on, and then that would be a very basic but valid example module. And obviously we need some more information. So for example, you'll need to specify, you know, load HTML true, and you'll notice that we get IntelliSense on it now because of these snippets. Another one that we have is basic theme, and that's again for PHP files. So if we just type thm, then we get a basic theme. So we do theme names, just example theme, the theme description. And you'll notice I'm just pressing tab to go through all of these, and then we can just do like return h1, just whatever. And this is all based on React functional components for its architecture. So this is all, you can just make it render it out directly, or you can make it return the HTML with PHP in it. Another one that we have is the DSJAS copyright. I need to update this actually because it's using the old copyright. We'll talk a bit about that in a minute, but if we just do DSJAS+C, we get the entire copyright message, and it'll look a little better. It'll look a little better when we actually put it inside of the PHP file. And it did that again with the snippets, but if we put it inside the PHP file and we do DSJAS+C, then we get the copyright inside of a comment, all correctly formatted in a few keystrokes, whereas I would have to go to another file, you know, into public, go into index, copy all this out, which is a nightmare with Vim keybinds. So, yeah, I'm quite proud of this because this is going to speed up my development massively. I don't know about anyone else's, but yeah, this should help quite a lot of people with developing stuff. Especially with the load routine, which can be quite confusing. Okay, so something I talked about briefly earlier was Docker support. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later, once we switch over to the Docker branch. But for now, all we need to know is that this Docker branch has got our Docker support on it, and that we've actually adjusted some things inside of the main code base in order to make it work with Docker. In particular, you've got things like the docs saying that you should go to Docker for more info. This is the wrong branch, but the README actually mentions Docker in it now. PHP CS works inside of Docker, and everything like that. We automatically call the install composer script inside of the Docker container. Everything works that way. And the final thing to talk about in the developer workflow, it's been about 15 minutes and I'm still on the first section, but the last thing to talk about the developer workflow is these scripts now have a shebang line so that they will work on Unix systems. They still work the same. On Windows. Shouldn't be any change. Everything still works as expected. There we go. But this shebang line makes it so that you can call it, if we switch to a Linux distro, if I was to switch over to WSL or whatever, I could just call this with the, with the / syntax. So rather than doing Python 3 install.py, instead I would just be able to do install.py. and then it would automatically read it and see the shebang line here and know that it should be doing it with the Python interpreter, not with bash or whatever it should be using. And another minor change is these scripts now ship by default with the execute bit set in the Unix permissions, and that's useful again just so that you can do the / syntax rather than having to do Python 3. I typed Python 4 twice now. Python 3, rather than doing that, you can now just type / and then the script name. So that's all the changes to the developer workflow. So now we're going to switch over and talk a little bit about the code cleanup operation and how it's been changing what we've been doing. So I'm going to switch over to the code cleanup branch, and there we go. So here we are inside of code cleanup, and if we actually have a look at the Git branching, then we can, once it loads itself, you'll notice all of the things that we've done to clean up the code. So these purple ones are code cleanup, I believe. So you can see the first two changes since the tag for the last devlog is we removed an unneeded anchor point about.php. This wasn't even being used by the default theme. I doubt it would be used by any other themes either. If you want to have an about screen, you can just make it protected in the theme configuration for users. We don't need an anchor point for it. There's no dynamic behavior. We also removed the options endpoint for the exact same reason. So, 2 endpoints gone, a little bit cleaner. No problems. So, this is a big one. We've refactored out all the reused anchor point code into one central function. So, if we take a look inside of here, previously you'll notice that rather than having this DSJAS function, what we had a whole load of copy-pasted theme code. And if we actually have a look, if we have a look at the diffs for this, and we see fast forward to current work state was the place that we were at the very first commit, and then if we have a look, you can see migrate all anchor points to new system, and if you see open changes, you can see that we changed it from having all of this copy-pasted code to a single call to a function. Now this magical function is the centralized load routine, and you'll notice that it says jump to load code. This load code is located in the include directory under DSJAS.php, a new file. So this DSJAS.php basically just contains a single load routine function which takes in all the information the old routine required and then just centralizes it. It also contains logic for the new theme global system that we'll talk about in a minute, but also it allows us to keep all of our anchor points using the same code but without copy pasting. It's all nice and simple, everything's centralized, no problems. The only changes that this required though is we now need to pass a reference to the module manager to theme APIs, and it's a slight inconvenience because I had to rewrite the theme APIs, but it wasn't that big of a deal. If you have a look and if we take a look inside the theme APIs like general, and then we take a look at the diff logs, you can see that migrate APIs to shared configuration, and with the shared theme globals and add initial migrate API to theme global system. It was literally a one-liner change. It wasn't that big of a deal. And this new system is here to stay. It's infinitely better in my opinion. Let's keep it. So for the new system, you notice I talked a while ago about a new variable called the theme global system. And if we take a look at the load routine, you can see that we're setting a global variable called theme globals and define it as an empty array. So what is this? Well, it's quite simple actually. All it is an array which is going to contain certain keys, and those keys tell the theme APIs what to do. So, for example, you can see we pass a reference to the module manager so that the theme API can add module descriptors. So if we look in general and we look at add module descriptor, you can see it's using the module manager to hook the event. You can see also that we're now using shared configuration in a shared database. What does this mean? It essentially means that rather than in all the theme APIs, you could see previously it was reparsing, re-including all the configuration. We could remove this include if we really wanted, and I think I will do that at some point. But you can see that we're now using shared configuration, and that shared configuration is parsed and loaded here, and also parsed and loaded here. And you'll notice that it includes the global configuration. It includes the theme configuration. It does not include the extension configuration, but does include the module configuration. So those are all the things that a theme will be worrying about. But you'll notice this is different to the normal configuration that we're using a minute ago, because that one only does global and theme. This one includes module support as well. So basically we can view the configuration of modules, we can do all that kind of stuff, and this is shared between all of the theme APIs. And if we have a look, you can see shared conf, they're all getting the key from the shared configuration. So that should significantly increase performance, because we're no longer reparsing every time we need to get the bank's URL or the bank's name. And if we look in certain pages, if we go to admin and then site, and then we look at things like Felicity Bank, on the contact page, we're getting the name of the bank several times. So for example, we'll get the bank URL here. At the top, we have to get the bank URL for the bar, trying to find where it is. About bank name, then at the bottom you can see get bank name twice. This should significantly increase the performance for pages like that where you're getting the configuration more than once. And even so, even if you don't even use it at all, it should increase the performance of configuration, because we're no longer getting and releasing locks on the file. We're no longer having to reload the file every time we need to configure or get some data from it. The only downside I could see from this is that themes could now have direct access to configuration objects that are still dirty in memory from them being changed by theme APIs, but the changes are committed basically as soon as the object goes out of scope in the destructor. So even if any malicious themes make any changes, the changes won't even be committed if the theme APIs make any changes between that point and when the theme is unloaded at the end of the load routine. So this is basically a null problem. This is just a passive performance increase, and we probably should have been doing it this way from the beginning. Reparsing the configuration in every single config file is really, really bad for performance, especially as the size of the config file grows, because we're planning on adding extra config keys, we're planning on doing all of that, and we can't do that kind of thing if we're reparsing a 100-line config file every single time that we want to do something with that. So let's move on to the next thing that we did in the code cleanup, and we're stopping the core layer from using any theme API code. So if we go to admin and then we go to stuff like the bank settings page and on the index page, you could see that we are using a function called getCurrentBankName. And if we actually go to the definition, you can see this is implemented in the customization file as a utility method. But if we actually look at the commit history, you can see move all core code using the theme API to core safe functions. And if we actually go to the changes for this, you can see that previously, we were using the theme API getBankName. And if we go to general.php and then we go to getBankName, this is a theme-only function. This is using theme globals, and it's using the shared configuration. It was impossible for the core layer to keep using this function. And not only is it bad coding style, but it's bad for performance because we had to reparse all the time, and all of the problems that we had with themes were all pretty much multiplied tenfold by this kind of stuff. And now that it uses a global configuration object, this is a lot better. It also means that we're no longer mixing what's part of the API and part of the core code. It's all nice and separated. So there is now no references to getBankName inside of theme APIs. In fact, if we go to the top of the page, we've actually removed the import statement. If we have a look, you should be able to see somewhere that don't think it's here actually, but we removed the include statement, or the require statement, for the bank API, and it's now gone. None of these core files in the admin directory or the admin dashboard now use the theme API, and that's the way it should have been for a long time, and now that's the way it is. So I've written in the script here that it's now exclusively for themes, and that's now actually going to be enforced in our coding style. If the file is not in the theme directory, PHP Code Sniffer is now going to flag a warning that you're using a theme API in a core layer file. That should never be mixed up. Okay, so the next thing to talk about is a major improvement to how you can include the theme API in your theme files. So if we collapse everything that we're not going to be using, you'd notice previously in themes, in order to get theme APIs, you'd have to do, if we have a look, seems to be a little bit, seems to have been overtaken, but if we had a look at this file, if we have a look through, and we have a look at this commit for include constants, you could see previously they would have to do abs path and then inc and then the entire path to the API theme directory. That was bad because, you know, theme developers would have to not only know the site inside and out to even be able to include APIs that they're going to need at some point anyway, but they also need to know, you know, no trailing slashes, they also need to know the abs path constant, they need to know to append the inc constant, they need to know that they shouldn't be using relative paths. Now all they have to do is just use a simple constant. And this has been migrated, all the themes that are shipped with DSJAS are now migrated to this. If we look at default minimal, you can see it's using the theme API constant. And if we look at Felicity Bank, I have to admit some of the Felicity Bank, that's test theme, not Felicity Bank. If we look at Felicity Bank, you can see that that's also using the theme API constant. So yeah, this should make it significantly easier to include theme APIs, and hopefully this is a change, you know, it's going to lower the bar for entries to making themes significantly, and let's just face it, it makes more sense. This should have been the way it was for quite a while. I've been saying that a lot, but yeah, this should have been the way that we were doing it from the start, and now it is. So, crisis averted. And final thing that we did for the code cleanup operation is we removed direct includes from the theme directory in favor of an API. So, if we look back in the API directory, and we take a look inside of here, and we look inside of, is it appearance? Yeah, get theme content. So if we go back to things like Felicity Bank and we take a look, doesn't seem like there are any examples in Felicity Bank, but if we take a look inside of this here, and you know that we've separated out into components so that we can include this in multiple places and have it, you know, the same everywhere. So if we look in mission.php, you can see that previously we were including, if we turn back on file blame, and we look at the timeline, can't seem to find it in the timeline, but previously this was just including a full path after the abs path constant and everything like that. It was just including a full path to the theme. But now it uses an API inside of the appearance directory to get the path. So we've added two APIs, get theme content and get raw theme content. Get theme content returns a formatted HTML-friendly URL so that you can include stuff like styles from your theme directory. So if we look in the default themes bootstrap file, you can see that it's using get theme content here to include styles.css from this styles directory. You can see, sure enough, it's including all of this. It's using the PHP API, and this is basically just going to substitute in the name of its the name of the theme and it's going to format it so that it's nice and URL friendly for HTML. The getRaw theme API file, however, or the getRaw theme content API, I should say, returns it not formatted for HTML, and also appends abs path to the beginning of it. And the reason it does this is so that you can just use it in a require statement or in something on the server. But the caveat for that is, if you get them the wrong way around, you might accidentally end up sending server information to the client, so it's really important to not get these the wrong way around. And we've made that clear in the documentation. Alright, so we've just hit the half-an-hour mark, so I think it's about time that we move on to actual proper changes. About time. So, Docker support. This is something that I've wanted to have done since the beginning of the project. Docker is a great technology, and it fits so well with the DSJAS use case that I'm surprised that I didn't design the site around it when I first started developing it. If we switch over to the Docker branch, you'll notice a few changes right off the bat, including the fact that there's now a Docker folder and a Docker compose.yml file. This Docker compose file is basically going to build two different Docker containers, a server container and a database container. This basically means that you can keep all of your data in the database, and you can dispose the server, reset all the configuration there, or the other way around. You can reset the database with one command, but you can keep the server configuration the same. And the best part about Docker is that it's isolated from the host, yet still interactable from the host. So what we have here is you can, when you build the server, you can just go to localhost on port 80, and you can even just SSH into the server, or just use docker exec to get a shell. So you have the same access to the server that you would if you were hosting it locally, but it's isolated. So if for whatever reason access is gained to it, then there's no way out of the container unless you specifically granted it. And we've sandboxed these services in such a way so that the database can be accessed locally, but the server has no way out. So basically, even if someone compromises DSJAS with an exploit, it's still sandboxed, they can't do anything, everything is fine. And my personal favorite feature about this is they come configured. So if we look inside of which one is it? Config. If we look in config.ini, it comes set up with good defaults, and it comes set up so that it works with the database. So it automatically plugs into the database and everything works. And, you know, everything just works out of the box, and that's the best part. So if I actually, if I just stop my MAMP server, which I have running, if I switch over the scene so that you can see what's going on, I have MAMP open. If we stop the servers, I can do a quick demonstration of Docker to you. So I'm gonna open up a VSCode command prompt, and what we're gonna do is docker compose up. And Docker for Windows isn't started, so I'm just gonna start it, and I might have to make a jump cut. I might have to make a jump cut here just because Docker for Windows historically has taken quite a while to start, so when it's started, I'll rejoin. Okay, so Docker for Windows has started, and we should now be able to run docker compose and then build. And you can see that it's going to build the database first of all. So while it's doing this, I'll walk you through what's going on behind the scenes. So if we look in database, we have a database file. And what this is going to do, it's going to pull from the MySQL latest tag. And this is just the latest MySQL server with factory settings, no databases. Now that's a problem though, because DSJAS needs a database that's set up in order to work. And we assume that it will work because it's set up as though it's installed. So we inject a SQL extension, which is automatically going to check out the database we set up, and it's then going to create all the tables required and add some basic data. You can see we're adding all of this here with all the IDs and everything required, so we're setting up Edna accounts, everything fine. And the reason this works is because you can copy it into a daemon's entry point script, and it will automatically run it when the Docker container is set up for the first time. Note that it doesn't run this every time the Docker container is started, it runs it when it's set up for the first time. Okay, so what you can see here is it's setting up the server, and the server is a lot more of a heavy operation. If we actually just in the background on Docker compose, if we run Docker compose up, we can see we're now going to recreate all of the different containers, and we have color-coded output from all of the different servers, and it's going to set itself up, everything ready. You can see it says ready for connections. We are ready to connect on the local host. So if I grab a Google Chrome window, you can see that we have a GET request coming in, and if I move this across onto the first screen, you can see this is a DSJAS install. It's all working, but this is coming from the Docker container. If we switch back to VSCode, we can see that we have GET requests being logged. And if we refresh, we have another GET request that's been logged. So this all works as though it's a regular DSJAS install. We can log in with the Edna account, and you can see that we have accounts set up. We have a new account set up as well, and everything works the same as before. If we go back, you can see everything's working as though it would on a regular server. We can log out, and also the admin panel works. If we go to the admin sign-in, it's slightly more difficult to sign in though, because the default credentials have been set up for you. But if we go to the docs directory, there's an entire Docker configuration thing. So if you look at the default credentials, just render this out real quick, you can see that the default administrator credentials are admin. So if we just type in admin and then DSJAS1234, just copy this, we can see we gain access to the admin panel. Everything's working the way that it would with a regular web server. But we didn't have to go through the install process. And you can see as well that we can set all the settings. Everything works the way it would normally. So I can change this to like Ethan Bank, save, go to the site. We now have Ethan Bank. But it's isolated inside a Docker container, so we can just press Control-C and everything will stop. And then afterwards, if we actually do Docker compose, if we do Docker compose down, we can see that we remove the containers, but then if we go up again, it's going to have to reinstall the database. But this is a good opportunity to show you what it's going to do. So you can see it's first off created with an empty root password, but then afterwards, the scripts that we've set up will automatically randomize the root password, but set the password to the DSJAS user to the database that we've just set up. And we also see that we give access to the schema that we just installed. You can see that we're running the entry point DSJAS database script, and then we can see that we're now ready for connections. And if we then refresh, we're back to factory defaults, and if we refresh as well, then our session has been destroyed. So the entire server has been reset to its defaults with just one command. And the best part about this as well is the automatic update system doesn't even need to be a thing inside of Docker containers. In fact, I'm thinking of adding a mechanism to detect Docker containers and disable the auto update system, because all you have to do is Docker compose pull. And I don't have this set up on this machine, but on yours, when you run Docker compose pull, you will be able to obtain the new version of the image from anywhere as long as you have an internet connection. No update scripts, nothing like that. No version control, no Git. You can just run it out of a Docker container and get updates straight away. Okay, let's have a look at what's next on the agenda. So, just before we finish up talking about Docker, we need to talk about the documentation. So, the Docker documentation, we have a guide to how to build, pretty simple really. It tells you about the different containers. The default credentials we just talked about a minute ago because I needed them, and it also talks about the database accounts in case you need to gain access to them to manually do something with the database. And also I've done a reference to the Docker file as to what it's doing, so in case you're interested. And then there's a summary for Docker support. You can run one service at a time, so you can run without a database. It's all very cool in my opinion. And the core has been migrated quite a few times to new systems to make it work with Docker because there's a tightened security. In fact, if we look back at the Git graph, if we have a look, try and find the exact commit. You can see better secure Apache file system. If we look at http.conf, it basically makes it so that nothing can be accessed apart from the stuff in the specific directory that we choose. And that's really important because it prevents directory escalation attacks. It's really important for us to have that in place. So Docker, just to summarize, Docker is better for security, it's better for use for development, it's very easy to get updates and download the project because of the GitHub package registry, and it's really easy to reset your site to factory defaults if you're worried about security, you want to remove all traces from a previous session. That can all be done. Okay, so we've finished talking about Docker and all of that, so it's time to talk about feature additions and changes, the actual changes to the site that we came looking for. So for this, I'm actually just going to pull up a working version of the site, so I'm going to need to restart my server. I'm just going to need to restart MAMP. So the main things I'm going to talk about are changes to the default theme and changes to the admin dashboard. There's not really any other changes that we need to talk about that much, but the default theme. So here we go. The default theme is now complete. Nothing more to do on it. The help and support menu, completely implemented, everything working. So for example, the fraud menu, there's now some nice, fraud information, and also this here. So yes, this is all implemented, all ready to go. The services panel, all completely implemented, all ready to go. That's all fine now. And we've also added some missing pages and changed out some links that were broken from the first version of the theme. So the default theme is now complete. The Felicity Bank theme, I've improved it for some little stability changes, but there's not really any changes to that. The default minimal theme has been complete since it was released, really, or released, quote-unquote released. It's not out yet, but you know what I mean. The biggest change you'll notice, though, is... Oh, I forgot I had this enabled. The biggest change you'll notice, though, is that we've completely reformatted the admin dashboard and the dashboard for the online bank. So, here we go. We now have a side panel. So we've moved everything around just a little bit. We thought that it looked a little bit empty before because it was literally just this and this. It looked really empty. I don't think it looked that great. So we now have a two columnar, I think it's called, layout. So we now have the important information on the right and some less important little pop-up information on the left. If you click on View All here, it just says there was an error attempting to retrieve your info. Please contact support, as everything does. There's also a thing to talk about banking on the go with getting the app, and also saving paper, which viewers of Kitbogo will know is a running joke. And also there's the contact support link, which actually does now take you to a working contact support page. And there's plenty of Easter eggs on this page. If you just pause, see if you could spot them all. But this Learn More takes you to the transfer page for some reason. But yeah, there's plenty of little Easter eggs, and if you click on submit message, you get your message quote-unquote submitted. There's actually no storage for this. All it does, if you actually have a look at the submit message, if we inspect it, you can see it's just a link. It doesn't actually submit anything. It doesn't go anywhere. So it's basically a useless form, but it looks like it works. So we can fill in anything here, it'll accept it. I think you actually do have to put in a valid email into here though. Then we click submit, you have the message submitted. You have the same sidebar though, so it makes it look as though it's the same page, and I'm quite proud of this layout. I think it looks quite good with this little green check and everything. So I'm proud of this page, but if we go to transfer page, there's been a slight, I've done a slight refactor. Everything looks a little bit more kind of off to this side. You'll have noticed before that there was actually this on top and then this underneath. That's been changed up. But the main change to the default theme is just the landing page, this sidebar, and the logout page is slightly more quick and reliable now. Yeah, there are all the changes. Apart from maybe the contact menu and the, the support menus. If we look at the online banking support center, you can see that there's content on all of these. The only one that there isn't content on is finances, where it says the content is unavailable, and then links to contact support. The reason, in case you haven't caught on already, the reason that we're trying to put the contact support thing in so often is because a lot of these people are very, very nervous about you trying to contact support, because the contact support representatives are likely to figure out what's going on and tell them, no, stop, this is fraud. So they're very, very jumpy about that. So I've tried to shove it onto as many pages as possible. And also we have a fraudulent, if we look at the visit support and then the security and fraud, if we go to more info, it takes you to action fraud, but on the report fraud link, there's actually a message about there's been a lot of technical support scams, and this really did. I don't know why this highlights it to me more than ever, but it just highlights to me how cool the updating of the name at a click is. So if we go to localhost/admin, and then we change the name, and you change it to Ethan Bank. If it doesn't crash, for whatever reason, and we refresh, you can see that it changes all of them. So Ethan Bank here, changes it to Ethan Bank here, changes it here, it changes it even in the paragraph text. And I'm pretty sure as well it changes it in some of these places in here. It changes it across the entire page. And I think that's really awesome. I don't know exactly why I think it's so awesome, but it just kind of highlights to me just how powerful this feature of changing the name at a glance is. So I could change this to empty as well, and it has nothing there. And it'll just have support and has been committed. Maybe don't do this. But yeah, you can change your identity at a click, basically. And I think that's a really powerful feature, and I really like it. I've had quite a lot of fun with this. Okay, so the final feature that's been added since the last update that we did was the theme validator. If you go to modules and themes, you might have noticed before when we were demonstrating this, there's a seemingly defunct feature that quote-unquote runs a validation. This button did nothing before we added it, but now it actually does something. It automatically runs through the theme, checks for module support, checks whether the required files are there, and checks whether the theme can be loaded, basically whether it's readable. If we actually take a look at the source code for this, if we go into admin, then I think it's settings, and then validate theme, you can see it's going to take a while, so we ignore the user closing the browser, but we actually pop some administration messages, and this is the first time that we've actually used the notification system on the home screen. So if we run a validation, you can see that we passed. If we go to the home screen, there are admin events that have been popped onto the admin dashboard now, with the exact date in UTC. You can see my time zone's actually slightly ahead of this because it's UTC, but yeah, the theme validator is functional and actually works now. And as well, if we switch over to a theme which is intentionally not valid, aka the test theme, you can see it's literally just a front page. Like if you go to any page, it, you know, an error occurred apparently. This theme is not designed to be functional, and it does even tell you you might want to re-enable the default theme now, and just links to the developer documentation, which is actually up. So yeah, if we run a validation on this, tells you that it passed with warnings, then the developer link tells you that it searched for the bootstrap file, couldn't find it. You know, it's telling you all the stuff that's wrong with your theme. It's all nice and formatted for developers. Everything all nice, but if we view the full results, you can see that the last validation was ran. It's not highlighted red anymore, the last validation was ran. But if we have a look, the theme validator was ran by an administrator, the results will be delivered when available. The theme validator was ran, validation has passed, but warnings were returned. Your theme may function unexpectedly. And you can actually, if you switch themes, for example, if we switch to Felicity Bank, it clears the validation state so that you don't end up with a validation persisting across themes. So if I switch to default minimal, validate it, it passes. Then we go back to modules and themes, switch to test theme. It's not going to say that it's valid anymore. It's going to clear the state because we've switched themes. I've specifically engineered it so that the default themes pass. This isn't just to make it look like our themes are better than anyone else's, it's just more so that users know that default themes are, you know, they do work, there's nothing wrong with them. But this is actually persistent data now, it's stored in the admin data directory, so if we look in data, admin notices, you can see it's stored here. And it's also stored inside of if we go to admin, then site UI, it's stored inside of the admin UI configuration file. You can see the Unix timestamp for the configuration date, and also the last code for how it passed. So if we switch to test theme, revalidate, and then we go back to this configuration, you can see the past warnings and the Unix timestamp has been updated. So yeah, that's how the theme validator works. And also we've made it so that it's basically kind of like there's a special format that we can use to write validation rules and things, and I'm working on making it so that that's the format that we use at some point in the future. Right now they're just kind of hard-coded into the file. It's not something that we want to keep. We're going to update that at some point to change it. And yeah, so we've been going for about 50 minutes, nearly an hour again. Whoops. But I'll be able to cut this down just to remove some of the rambling a little bit. I'm going to have to go against the no editing style just a little bit to make that jump cut we were talking about before. So, yes, thank you for tuning in to the second episode of the DSJAS Developer Logs, and I'm going to say this at the end of all of this. Please be sure to join us when the public beta launches, hopefully at some point before September is when I'm aiming for. So if you go to github.com/DSJAS, we are now located at that link. It's no longer at overengineeredcode/DSJAS. That was the old link. It's now at the organization link. You can actually see there's a website at dsjas.github.io as well. So be sure to go and check those out, and thank you for tuning in. I'll see you in the next developer log video. Bye!